Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Dr. Lynette Reed. Lynette is a people and culture partner who also mentors executives to help improve connections within the workplace. She has mentored people from businesses, not-for-profits, schools, allied health agencies, chambers of commerce, governments, and churches. She has taught courses on team building, leadership, ethics, world religion, and world cultures. Her current literary contributions include an executive summary paperback titled Fixing the Problem, Making Changes in How You Deal with Challenges, as well as book contributions, articles, guest radio appearances, and a series of children's books with Abingdon Press. She is also a co-founder and board member of the Institute for Soul-Centered Leadership at Seton Cove. Lynette holds a Doctor of Ministry in Spirituality, Sustainability, and Interreligious Dialogue, and a Master of Science in Communication Sciences and Disorders. Her mission is to help people and organizations feel more connected to the world around them and the relationships that are most important to them. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lynette Reed. Welcome, Lynette.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm good. So thank you so much for joining us from your home office in, how do you pronounce it? Salado,
Texas.
Salado, Texas.
Close to Austin. I'm about 45 minutes north of Austin.
A little bit north of Austin, one of my favorite cities. So tell us, Work from the Inside Out, it's all about the lives we've lived professionally, the twists, the turns, the changes we've made. But all of us started from somewhere. Tell us a little bit about your earlier years and how some of that might have been formative in terms of where you are today.
Well, it's funny, whenever I talk about stuff like that, I don't know why, but for some reason I always tend to start with when I got to college.
Okay.
I guess, I did normal stuff as a little kid, but when I went to college, I really, wasn't sure. I thought I knew where I wanted to go. And I guess this is the big lesson learned for me is just because you think you know where you're going doesn't really mean you do know where you're going. And so I went into a degree field. I was in speech communication sciences and disorders, which some people know as speech pathology. And I worked with interpersonal communications a lot. And I also did some work with Head Start in Montgomery, Alabama. My husband went to Auburn, War Eagle, and my brother also went there. So we lived close to Montgomery, so I worked there. And the way the Head Starts were created there at the time I was there it was in the middle of the projects because that way it was easy for all the kids to get there. And for me, coming in as the only white person, it was very African American. It was actually a wonderful experience because I got to see a world that I had never grown up in and I didn't know. And the people were so nice to me. I mean, there was a lot of danger there. I mean, it's a very challenging place to live just because there was a lot of, there was a joke that there was a shooting at least once a day in this place. And so the joke was, where's the shooting going to be today? And we didn't mean that in a funny way, but in a, what are you crazy, going voluntarily into this? And I always thought to myself, well, the people who live here aren't living here voluntarily, I mean, they are, but, this is the circumstance they're in. And so it was a wonderful learning experience for me because I got to talk to people and hear these really, really good stories about, what it's like to live in poverty in the United States with kids and all, and how do you raise kids? Because Head Start, for those of you that don't know, it's for kids that are 3 to 5 years old. Right. So we're talking about little children that are just now developing into their lives,
right?
And helping not only teach them, but teach the people who are working with them. So I worked a lot with parents and the wives and people that were working there in this facility. And I just loved it. It was probably my favorite job because the people were just so appreciative, and we had such a good relationship at the time. And so things like those types of stories are the ones that really, I think, formed my opinions as I grew up. The other big one I did that was a real game changer for me doing speech path was in Austin. There's a group called Austin Smiles, it's a team of basically plastic surgeons and a dentist, and they have a bunch of different people. And you go to places that don't have care, and they do cleft lip and palate surgeries. And so one of my jobs way back when was I was helping with the cleft palate team in Scott and White Hospital, which is our big local hospital. Back when they first started. I'm dating myself. So I would go on these trips to El Salvador. And the first one I went on was right after the Civil War and the earthquakes there.
Oh, wow.
So, they said, don't go up in the mountains because there's still, kidnappings and stuff like that. Stay in groups. And so I went on this trip. And, we saw, I don't know how many children who had cleft lip and palates to do the surgeries. But we spent 4 days doing surgery, and then one day going on a trip and seeing some local culture. And so it was really inspiring because you saw, once again, people in a different world. And, to me, it was just so diverse because you had, if you went one way, it was the wealthy homes with the maids in their little outfits and the machine gun guards at the door. And if you went the other way from the hospital, there were people living in cardboard boxes.
Wow.
This was, like I said, during war-torn times.
Yeah.
And so they were still recovering. And, I can remember going to the grocery store with a group of people, and there was barbed wire all around the parking lot fencing. And there was armed guards, submachine guns at all the entrance points and everything. And so,
that's amazing.
You never lived that, living in middle America, and then you go into that kind of a situation. It really you think, wow, the world is a bigger place, and we really are interconnected because, these things that we're doing, we changed, when the plastic surgeons went in and did those jobs, they changed those children's lives forever. You know what I mean? You just don't really appreciate, I think, when you live in, living in Austin, this area, it's very simple. Of course, we have our dangers like every other place, but there's not a lot of, really bad stuff going on or scary stuff. Yeah. And so, when you go into these places where it's war-torn or where there's a lot of poverty or things like that, then you really shift your perspective. And I think that was the big advantage to doing the speech therapy was I got to work with people and help engage with them in ways that were going to hopefully change their lives. Yeah. And so that's kind of my starting point of my story.
I'm curious now, where did you grow up in the Austin area?
No, we moved around a lot. My dad actually was a college professor. And so we moved quite a bit. We were kind of like a military family, but in the world of
academia.
Academia, yeah. So I was very used to academia, and he was in it. He actually taught at Auburn for 20 years. So, and then my mom was an educator. She taught elementary children. So I came from an education background. So, but, it's funny though, because, even though that was a part of my life, I really, when I think back on it, my childhood didn't really have an impact on how I moved in my life. You know what I mean? It was kind of interesting because I didn't have a bad childhood, but it wasn't something where I think, oh, wow, that really impacted how I did it. To me, it was these bigger stories of where I went and what I learned and what I chose to do after that. And to me, I guess, when I talk to a lot of people nowadays, they talk about, their childhood, whether it was really bad. Some people I work with have just really, really horrible childhoods. And some people had very nice childhoods.
Right.
And so you hear all these childhood stories and you hear people talk about how they either overcame obstacles to become something more, or, that they did not take advantage of the fact that they had the wealth and privilege they had. And so I think in many ways, it's even though your childhood shapes you, I think that when you start making those choices in life, that's when you really have more power and control over where you're going and what you're doing. Yeah. And so to me, I think that's kind of why my story starts there, is because I kind of look at that as that point where I got to start making my decisions and I got to start deciding what the world was going to look like and how I was going to move forward in it. So,
and it was really interesting to you, or enlightening to you, I guess, in some respects, it sounds like, to really kind of plant yourself in these different communities with people that you were just not used to being around. But also being in a position to be able to really have an impact and be able to help them. But it sounds like your career as a speech pathologist was an entree into all kinds of other worlds. And learning how to interact with people that were different than me. Sometimes it's easy to interact with people that you get along really well with. If you like somebody, it's easy to talk for a couple hours, kind of like we did earlier when we visited. But some people, they have a very different life or very different beliefs, and it's much harder. So I think it really helped me in what I'm doing now, because I learned how to not judge people based off of where I thought they were, but come to them from where they were and accept that as part of them. And, especially as we're getting more and more into this diversity and inclusion discussion, to me, I think that was something that really sang to me, was that, if you're going into a situation basically colorblind, ethnic blind, religion blind, and you're just saying, hey, we're all human beings here trying to, get through the day. How do we help each other? How do we communicate more effectively? Then I think that really was a good lesson for me to learn in order to be more effective at the job I do now. So it's funny how it kind of flows like that. Right. So would you say that those earlier experiences had the impact to the extent that you decided to move away from speech pathology into other things, or was it more of a sort of natural segue?
Well, I don't think anything, I always joke because I don't think anything in my life is really planned per se. I'm one of those people that I like to be organized and I like to have a plan, but it never really goes the way I think it's going to go. So the big turning point was I'd been doing it for maybe about 15 years, and I said, I'm not really feeling this anymore. And so I thought, okay, so what am I going to do though? Because, that's where everything is, my career, my education, all that. It's kind of hard to just do an about face.
Right.
And I had this thought of going back to get like a doctorate. And I thought, okay, what would I get it in? And there was a couple of things that happened all at once. And there was this opening for at United Theological to be a part of a team. And the professors were a guy named Paul Netter, who was probably one of my biggest mentors. He was he used to be a Jesuit priest, but then he kind of changed paths, got married, and he was married to a woman who was of the Buddhist faith. And so
wow.
he's written a number of books on it. He's a great, if you want a good read on things like that, Paul Nitter's written a number of books. And so he was one of the professors. And then Jay McDaniel, who is at Hendrix College, I don't know if he still is. I haven't talked to him recently, but he did a lot of ecological work in ecology and religion. And so I had to take some extra courses because I didn't have the credentials, but I, for some reason, got into the program. And we just had a mixed bag of people. It was, some people were doing their dissertations on food, the relationship of food to things, and some people were having more of a religious slant. And so we started talking a lot about spirituality, and that was kind of my focus area. And in that field, it was talking about, when you started reading the root word of spirit, it's breath. And it just kind of sung to me that, okay, if spirit is breath, then basically with every breath you take, you get to decide how you're going to treat people, what you're going to do as a person, and how you're going to respond to the world. And, when you think about how many breaths you take in a day, you've got a number of opportunities to change how you see the world. And so it really kind of almost in some weird way fit in with the speech path, interpersonal communication.
Right.
How do you respond to people? And so when I was doing the research for the degree, these things kept popping up in all these books. I read hundreds of books on it, and some religious, some not, some about work, some about business. There's a great one on spirituality in the workplace that somebody had done some studies on that, and I said, wow, this really, this is a really important part of business. And I had friends who were, one of my friends was a president of a mortgage company, and I was talking to her about it, and she was like, yeah, this would really work. I don't know what you'd call it. And this was like 20 plus years ago. I mean, this was back in 2000. So we're talking 20 years ago. And so we started joking that, there's really no word for this. There's no vocabulary because nobody does it at work really, and if you think of spirituality, you're thinking either religion or crystals are the two big ones I got.
Right.
So you had to navigate through that. And so that's kind of what my past 20 years has been, is kind of researching and looking at ways to integrate spirit, connectivity. How do you connect to yourself, other people in the world, into the conversation, because it really touches on diversity. It touches on critical thinking skills, sustainability, resilience, pick a topic, and it all goes back to spirit, corporate culture, engagement. So now it's a mixed bag for me because I can't call it spirituality really yet. Now it's becoming more prevalent, but you then have the question, how do you show people this thing that could really help their business?
Right.
When we don't have the vocabulary and it's not a mainstream thing to do.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's interesting to hear you talk about this, and it almost feels like you kind of tripped and stumbled into this doctoral program in some ways.
Much, yeah.
And yet at the same time, there's a real, what I'm hearing is there's a real thread of continuity between,
very much, yeah.
Your days in Montgomery, Alabama, your work with Austin Smiles, where you're talking about, connecting to other people, which also enables a different connection even with yourself, right?
Yeah.
And then taking that into, places where people go almost every day, right? People go to work, people go to businesses, people are interacting on a regular basis in lots of the places where you're now doing your work. And so it's an interesting path of how you got to where you're going today. And, and I can see where you're a little careful about using the word spirituality and explaining it, because you don't want people to just think of it in one context, because it really does cross over a number of different disciplines and ways of looking at the world and ways of looking at how we travel in our lives, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That we're all the same, but we're all different. Yeah.
Well, yes. But I just wanted to mention that your PhD you got from the United Theological Seminary of Ohio, but you were in Texas while you were doing this. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually a doctorate of ministry.
It's a doctorate of ministry.
Yeah, right. Doctorate of ministry, a DMin. And yes, they did it. It was kind of a hybrid. What you would do is you once a semester you would go to the university for a week and do what was called an intensive. So basically you'd start at 8 a.m. We'd go to like 10 at night for a week and do all of the coursework.
I see.
And everything else was at home, your research, and you had what you had at you had a mentor. Mine was a lady by the name of Dr. Laura Hobgood Oster, who was at Southwestern University in Georgetown, and she was my mentor here, and I would meet with her throughout the semester, and we would have meetings and talk about what I was doing and the coursework and all of that, and then go back and meet with my professors online. So it was virtual, it's kind of like they're doing now, but they were doing it back in the 2000s. So
now I'm curious. So when you started the program, you had said, you were looking to grow yourself. You were looking to do something else. That speech path was just not doing it for you or wasn't enough, that you needed to expand yourself, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so you came across this doctoral program and it spoke to you somehow. It's not like you went out applying to a bunch of other doctoral programs.
No. Well, actually what happened, the story there is that a friend of mine, and I'll be honest with you, I can't even remember who it was, said to me, "Hey, have you ever thought about going into ministry?" And I was like, "No," I said, I'm not really, that doesn't really seem to me as far as a profession, I said, but, I said, okay, I'll explore. And I looked around there a little bit and I was like, no. And then I was looking through a magazine, and it was just, like a journal magazine, like a Texas Monthly, something like that.
Yeah.
And there was a little bitty article, and it said, United Theological is accepting applications for this new program with Dr. Paul Knitter and Jay McDaniel. And so I looked them up, and I was like, oh my gosh, it has to do with sustainability, which I was always very interested in. How do we take care of the earth? Things like that. And it had to do with, spirituality. And it was like, that sounds like something that I could really get on board with. And so I contacted the university and talked to them, and they said, okay, because, normally most of the people that they would have in would be people who were more from the ministry perspective.
Right. That's what I would expect. Yeah.
But there was a number of people who were not there that were doing it for, administrative types of things and all too.
Interesting.
And so they just, I don't know how, like I said, what I just said, I don't know how I got in, but I did. And so it ended up being a really, really wonderful thing for me, because one of the other things they would do is have guest speakers come in and speak in the class, during our intensive. And one of the people who came and spoke to us actually was talking about quantum physics. Because if you think about, my knee hit the table. When you think about quantum physics, it's about how, magnetic fields and how the earth is interconnected with each other, and how, like when we move an arm, it moves the atmosphere around you. And, then you get into like the butterfly effect, where, there's a whole bunch of stuff on that. There's a great video on YouTube about that. But, then you start thinking, wow, whatever vocabulary you want to put around this stuff, there really are these connections. And how in the world do we show people that, when they've never seen it before? Because
right,
like any skill, to me, the way I've always looked at it is, when you're learning about this stuff, it's it's a skill that you learn. In fact, the thing I hear the most from people that I work with now is, why does nobody teach this? Why have I never learned this? And I'm like, darned if I know, but I just kind of fell into it because, when I put together there's a model that came out of my work from my dissertation. And it's the one I've been using for 20 years. And it still today is as effective as it was 20 years ago. And it's ironic because it's all based on spiritual concepts, but it's about human potential. And that's what I call it, because then it doesn't have the wording doesn't have a lot of stuff tied to it.
Right.
So you can say human potential, and everybody kind of can basically agree that has to do with how we as people in society have the ability to do things no matter what situation we're in.
Right.
So that's actually how I ended up going to the university. It was the seminary was from that. So
so you were, you clearly something drew you in, right? It just sort of was. It sounds like the being at the right place at the right time. The moment struck. You looked into it. You got in, and a couple of questions here. One is, I'm curious what your expectations were going in, or what you thought you were going to get out of this. Versus or how that evolved for you, and how long a process was it from the time you started the program till completing it? Because I can imagine you went into this program with a little bit of, I would say, beginner's mind, a little bit of open-mindedness. I mean, not that you had a lot of life experience already that you brought to it, but it sounds like you went into it with kind of a wide-eyed perspective.
Totally. Yeah. People would ask me, why are you, what are you going to do with this when you're done? And I was like, darned if I know.
Okay. That's what I thought.
I said, because sometimes I do think you have to go kind of with your gut. And, you all got that intuition. And as some people, can feel it more than others. But if you've got that sense of intuition, sometimes the best thing to do is to just say, forget it. I'm going to go do it and let the chips fall where they may. Because, I was walking away from a pretty significant salary. And we had 2 young children at the time. I bless my husband's heart. He's, we're definitely a team. But when I talked to him about it, he was like, you got to do it. He said, yes, it's going to be a little bit of a financial hardship in the short term. But he says, the goal here is more than the money. It's more about how do we take money and stay solvent and where we want to be financially, but still follow our hopes and dreams and follow that gut instinct. And we'd actually, another long story too, is we did that with his job too.
Oh, wow.
He was an Apache pilot, and now he's a manager of a COG in our area. So he went full circle too. So we both kind of did that.
Well, we might have to have a whole nother.
Yeah, that's a whole interview him. So it was just one of those things where we said, we need to do it because it just feels like it's the place we need to be. And he would watch the kids whenever I was up at Dayton. And what was great was at the time, my brother was living in Cincinnati. He was working for the University of Cincinnati because he's a professor also. And he would come pick me up at the airport. I would fly into Cincinnati. He'd pick me up at the airport. I'd spend the weekend with them visiting, and then he'd drive me over to Dayton for my classes and come pick me up. And so it was kind of nice because I got to spend some time with him because we're pretty close, and then go take a break and go do that, and then come back. And my husband and our friends would watch the kids while I was doing it. So we had
great.
Just a wonderful support system, and it took about 2.5 years to finish it. But I met some wonderful people. In fact, I still am friends with some of the people that I went to the seminary with. One of the guys actually lives up in D.C., Don Zimmer, and he actually ended up writing a book that's a really good one he is still doing his work. So, and we see him. We used to see him quite often. Now we do Zoom events with him and his wife. So that we could stay connected. So we'll do our little time.
So you went from going into this program, wide-eyed, open-minded. You had your You had your circle of support, which is wonderful. And when did it start to formulate in your mind where you might take this doctoral work you were doing? Did you find yourself, did things start to form for you along the way, or did it happen afterwards? I'm just curious.
Well, it's that long and windy road. I finished the degree, and in the degree, one of the things that I found was that there were these three things that if you did them, it would, for want of a better word, it would center you. It was a good focal point for how you were going to behave. Going back to that whole thing of spirit being breath. Okay. Right. So when they say, take a breath, count to 10,
right.
That's that time where you're saying, okay, there's this gut instinct in me. There's something there. We don't know what we want to call it, human potential, spirituality, whatever it is. There's something in us that says, hey, go this way, go that way, act this way, act that way. And that's the center part. And then around that is our what I call our fear responses, that fight or flight. I've done a lot of looking into that because to me, whenever we're doing things at work or at home, a lot of the times our responses are based off of what our fears are.
Yeah.
And so if you're a fighter, you're going to yell at people, or you're going to be aggressive, or you're going to be condemning. If you're a flight person, you're going to avoid. You're going to be passive aggressive. You're going to have behaviors that kind of go towards that. But if you learn with this skill set that I teach, not to let fear be your motivator, but to let your decisions and your ability to take a breath and move into a situation with a response, then you're going to respond to the world in a much more effective way. And what's interesting was, even though I didn't realize it at the time, the reason I think it was so successful for me to do Head Start and El Salvador and any of the other places I've been, it was because I went in with no expectation of what I was going to get, no expectation, no fear. People would ask me, well, aren't you afraid to go there? And I would be like, no, because if I'm going there, I know it's as safe as it's going to be. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm going somewhere where it's pretty sure shot I'm going to get killed. I wasn't going into a war zone. But I knew that, if I go, I'm making a difference. And so it was that cost reward kind of thing. Yeah. And so I didn't even realize it at the time, but it was, I kind of inherently had these three things already kind of in my DNA. And I think there's a lot of people out there who do have it. A lot of people I'll talk to and tell them the three things that I use to teach people. And they're like, well, duh. And, okay, this is somebody who kind of inherently has learned this component. And so in a nutshell, the three things are, the first one is you have to have some core words that help keep you focused, and this goes into that whole discussion. If you wanted to branch off here into mindfulness, how do you decide how you're going to act? And so I'll sometimes with people, I'll call this active mindfulness, because what you're doing is you're saying, okay, in this one moment I have, this one breath I have, I'm going to make a conscious decision instead of an unconscious, fear-driven decision. And so what you do is you pick these words: kind, friendly. It has to be an adjective that's actionable. It can't be happy, because sometimes we can't make ourselves happy. Sometimes we're just not happy. And so it has to be something like kind, because we can always be kind to people. We can always choose to do that. Friendly, everybody's got to pick their words that sing to them. And the good news is you don't have to stick with them. If you try it and it doesn't work for you, just pick another word.
Another one.
Find one that's authentic for you. It's funny because I joke, because even grumpy can be a word, because if you think about it, there's some people who are very grumpy, but everybody loves them because they're very authentically grumpy people.
Right.
So to me, you pick your words, and then anytime something happens, especially in those big challenging times, that's going to be your default button. Okay. You're going to think, okay, how in this one breath that I have, am I going to be kind, even though this person is driving me incredibly crazy, because you can be kind to somebody when you're scared of them, when you're mad at them, when you're, frustrated with them, any of those things. And at work, you figure you're spending 60 hours or more, usually a week with these people. Yeah. And it's hard sometimes to be friendly to somebody for that many times. So sometimes you may have to say the most friendly thing I could do is walk away.
Right.
Seriously, because you can do that. And the other one is you have to be friendly to yourself. Yeah. Because people a lot of times think, oh, I'll just have to be friendly to everybody, but I'm going to treat myself terribly. Well, that's that part of the whole, self, other people, and the world. Yeah. So how are we friendly to ourselves? How are we friendly to other people? How are we friendly to the world? How are we kind to ourselves, kind to other people, kind to the world. Yeah. And then you spend some time working on that. So whenever I go in and work with somebody, that's the first thing we talk about is how do you find that for yourself? And then you pick your words and then you think about them throughout the week. And it takes a couple of weeks to kind of think, okay, yeah, I like this word. It sings. It feels good for me. I can do this. Yeah. And then once you've done that, then you do words and actions. Okay. So
is that the two?
That's the second one, yeah. And this is the hard one because if you ask people if you're looking at the true nature of somebody, what's going to tell you their true nature, their words or their actions? Which one would you guess?
I think their actions.
And yeah, exactly. Because if you're saying, yeah, I'm a friendly person, but then I'm looking at you like this all day,
right?
Is anybody going to really believe you're a friendly person? And that's going to cause a fracture there,
right? So. And you hear about expressions like they're talking out of both sides of their mouth, or they do one thing and say another. And I teach a course in communications where I teach people that 93% of all communication is nonverbal. Yeah. So that's going to include facial expressions, tone. It could be actions, right? Anything but the actual words themselves, even though the word, though, gives you that grounding in that context.
Yeah.
To behave from, right?
Yeah. That's actually a really good point because, when you're talking body language, facial expressions, and if it's 93%, well, what does a kind face look like? Yeah.
It's all in the eye of the beholder, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because when I work with groups, I actually have to define that. We have to sit down and say, okay, can we all agree what kind means? Because everybody's going to have a different meaning for it, and you have to have agreed upon things. So if it's friendly, and everybody's in the room, and some of them think friendly is just being nice, and the other ones think that being smiling like this is one, then you have to kind of define what everybody's going to find acceptable.
I think of the Santa Claus in the shopping mall, right? Who's looking very cheery and friendly, and you walk up to the Santa Claus with a 3-year-old who takes one look at that person's face. They are horrified and scared out of their minds, right?
Yeah, like,
whereas most of us would say, oh, it's just a cheery face, but like I said, in the eye of the beholder, if you're a 3-year-old and you've never met a big man in a big red suit who you don't know, saying ho 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 at you, it may not feel that friendly or kind.
Exactly. Yeah. So, that's very true. In fact, we always laugh because, especially when you've got your parents saying, no, he's fine. And you're like, no, I think I'm okay with not doing that. So,
I don't need my picture taken with this guy.
I'm good. Yeah.
So that's 2 words in action.
Yes.
What's 3?
And with words and actions, the other thing I usually tell people is it's not only in keeping it with the words that you choose, but also with what you're committing to do. So like for instance, because to me, the way I kind of look at it is anytime those 2 things don't match, you put a little fracture. It's a little microfracture. Yeah. And if you have 1,000 microfractures, then it's going to have a bigger impact on your company than 2. You know what I mean? So, because everybody's going to have some breakdown in that, but
sure.
that the more you have, and the more I had a young person I was working with who her boss was telling her one thing and doing something totally different. And she was like, it's driving me crazy because, he says, you're in charge of this. But then whenever I try to take charge of it, he says, no, you don't do that. And so she couldn't win, and it was making her look bad because people would say, well, you're in charge of that. And she said, well, yeah, I am, but I can't do anything with it. Yeah. And so, you're in a situation like that, you're like, well, what are his actions telling you? Don't listen to his words. What are his actions? And then having to navigate through that. So,
right. And then what do you, when you said, like, how do you then commit to something? Because you're being, the words are telling you one thing, the actions are telling you another, and you're left betwixt and between, if not completely frustrated.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And sometimes, you can resolve it, but sometimes you just have to go find another job where somebody, has a different opinion. So, but then the third one is, and this one changed a little bit. It started out with, if you look at most of my stuff, it says expectations to reality. And what I first started out with is I had a counselor friend of mine once say to me that the further your beliefs are from reality, the more distressed you'll become. And I thought, that's interesting because, we talk about that whole fear thing.
Right.
And so I said, okay, so what does that mean for this model that I'm, looking at?
Right.
And it was, okay, if you don't want to be distressed, then you have to look at situations without being, looking at them from what you want as opposed to what they are.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if you've got a boss that is just fracturing your relationship by words and actions not matching.
Right.
Well, you can wish all day long that it's going to change and get mad about that. Or you can say, you know what, this is not going to change. The past year's been this way. And so I need to think about what my next steps are going to be from that. Right. And it slowly over the years has devolved into don't judge things as good or bad or wrong or right. And
say that again. Don't
judge things as good or bad or wrong or right.
Oh, okay.
So, and this is a really good one when I talk about like diversity and inclusion, because this goes into that whole value as a person thing. If you're judging people around you on a value system, oh, that person's bad. Oh, they did a horrible job on that. Right. If you're doing those kind of words, then you're not looking at the situation to move it forward.
Right.
You're dragging everybody backwards, trying to decide who to blame.
Right.
So when you take out the judgment of good or bad or wrong or right, everybody's on a level playing field, and you can say, okay, how do we move this situation forward?
Right.
And it doesn't matter what color you are, what race where you come from, whether you're poor, rich, everybody can do that. And that goes, like you were saying, it goes back to those memories and stories of places like the Head Start in El Salvador.
Right. Right.
Nobody was good or bad or wrong or right. We were just all different people trying to do something together.
Right.
And think about what that would look like for a company.
And think about what that might look like for our Congress. Not to get political, but
any political. Yeah, we could have all kinds of discussions about that. So
I just couldn't help myself in that.
Yeah. It's a crazy world, isn't it? So,
well, it's made up of humans, right? And I think one thing that you have been pointing to throughout all of this is that none of us does any of this with any kind of perfection, because we know that doesn't exist.
No,
we all have judgments. That's part of being human.
Right.
But I think what you're pointing to here, which is so important, is, and I love the way you've laid it out, is it's something we can all work on and continue to practice. And it's like building a set of muscles around this and a mindset that are really going to keep us, I think, both staying open and curious and creative in terms of how we move forward in our lives, in our work. These are frameworks. This is a model that really anybody
Yeah, anybody can use it.
Yeah.
And if everybody's using it, then there are no discussions about inclusion or diversity, because if everybody does this model, then you're not focused on whether a person is a certain religious affiliation or a certain color or a certain gender bias or any of that stuff. You're looking at it from the perspective of, we all have talents and skills. How do we take those talents and skills and use them together to create something more innovative, or more in keeping with where we want to go? And that gives us tremendous power as individuals, because we can change the world with that. You know what I mean? A company can completely change the way it does something just by doing that. Yeah, and I've seen it happen. It's like magic in some ways. I probably shouldn't say it like that, but
well, it can have that quality though, because there is that sort of, I think of something magic as being maybe a little less than tangible.
Yeah.
Some of the things that you're pointing to here really aren't tangible. We can't necessarily touch them or put our hands around them, but we can experience them in a way, and we know how that leaves us feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm curious though, when you say, if we could do things this way, we might not be having as many conversations about diversity and inclusion and things like that. How do you, or I'm just curious, how do you, layer this over the fact that, we have like pay inequities, or, that we have lots of tangible evidence.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking as a woman, we talk about inequality for women.
Right.
They have some documentation that says that, women are not paid. There's not as many. I saw a report the other day where, only 18, 20, I don't have the exact number of CEOs are, female.
Right.
So, I could say, well, okay, let's have that battle. But to me, what I kind of feel like is, there's a lot of divisiveness right now. The big debate I always have is, there's a thing called binary thinking. I don't know. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah.
Where basically it's ones and zeros, ironically, technology. And basically what it says is you're either wrong or right.
Right.
Good or bad.
Right.
Which is totally against, you don't judge things as good or bad or wrong. Right. So you're automatically, you're at a disadvantage with the model, because it goes totally against where our society is right now.
Right.
Very black and white of, if you're not with me, you're against me. I mean, if you look at Facebook, oh my gosh, there's so many people on there who just, I'm not going to talk to you again, because you're a different Democrat and I'm a Republican, or I'm a Republican.
Right.
And so to me, you got to shift the discussion.
Yeah.
Which discussion would you rather have?
Right.
That there's equality, or how do we get everybody to where we're not judging things as good or bad or wrong? Right?
Or I think,
how do you do that? How do you
take the words into action? Right. So, so the notion being that, how do you get this dynamic, or these dynamics, because they're multi-layered, right?
Yeah.
How do you get them to evolve to a point where you've got people having those discussions, without the sort of, all or nothing, 0 or 1, right or wrong kind of culture or kind of thinking or conversation. The question I asked a little while ago was more thinking about, how deeply ingrained certain things are in our culture. I think in many cultures around all kinds of, discrimination, the history, the depths of that, and how that has, how people carry that with them. Yeah. Rightfully so. I understand it. I understand it as far as I can understand it. Right.
Yeah.
Or some of the work that I see going on out there around implicit bias, and so, that kind of thing where, I think what you're speaking to here can really serve that work. So it's, in a way, I would say that your model can help us further the conversations about diversity and inclusion rather than
100%.
Because I don't think we're going to not need those conversations.
No, oh no, yeah.
I think if anything, what you're pointing out to here is going to serve all of that in a way to bring it to a better place.
Yeah. I was talking about, fracturing. Well, if we're such a fractured community, and I'll just speak to the United States because I live here, but I hear it from other people in different countries too, is if when something's really, really fractured, how do you fix it? And you can't, you got to think, okay, there's a billion fractures in this thing. So if there's a billion fractures and we can't just scrap it and say, oh, do over, then you have to have those discussions to say, okay, this happened in the past. And yes, it was a horrible thing. However, how do we move forward? In fact, the best example I like to use, and I apologize, but I have a horrible memory for names. I can go pull the book off my shelf and get it for you. There was a guy who was a psychologist, and he was in the Holocaust, and he wrote a book on it.
Oh, Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I knew the name.
I knew exactly who you were talking about. Yeah.
And he wrote in his book about how, people in the Holocaust some people would store and hoard their last bit of food, and other people would give their last crumb of bread to somebody, even though they were starving. And so his point I took from that was that even in the most horrendous, horrible situation, we still have a choice.
Yeah.
How do you, if we have those choices, and we were so fractured right now, what are our choices going to be as individuals, as groups, as society? How are we going to choose to say, wow, I'm really mad about that, and that happens, so that's going to be that's how I'm going to define everything I do,
right?
In a bad way,
right?
You hear what I said? Bad way. I don't mean it that way. I mean,
no. I know. I get it.
That we have to decide. Okay, how do we heal things that are broken? How do we fix them? And words and actions matching. Picking words. Now, I can't really help if you say I want to be angry and hostile. Well, that's where you're going to go. But recognizing there are consequences to being angry and hostile.
Sure.
There's consequences to being kind. None of them are bad. It's just that they're choices that we're making with every breath that we take. And, you look at people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi. I mean, look at how they live their lives.
Right.
We don't, even though he's African-American, he's probably somebody I think really did a wonderful job of saying, hey, look, we need to change what's going on here, but let's do it in a kind way.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin Luther King, from what I've read of him and seen of his stuff is, I never saw him getting, judging other people and saying they were bad. No. He was always saying, this has to change. Yeah. And we're going to have these protests in a very nonviolent way to express our frustrations.
Right.
And so we do have choices in how we protest. And that doesn't mean there's not going to be wars. And that doesn't mean that people aren't going to do things that are unkind to other people. Right. It just means that we choose whether we're going to consciously do them and we're just making the decision to fracture it, or we're making the decision to heal it. And if we fracture it, then we're going to have wars and bombs and bad stuff like that, things like that going on. And if we choose to do kind things or, affirming things, then that's the society we're going to have.
Right.
And what you hope for is there's enough people in the world who want the healing, non-fractured society than the people who want the broken, angry society.
That's what we hope.
And that's, that's the $1 million question is how many of us want that, choose to make that choice to not be fractured.
Right. And so, you're taking your model and your messages, and I don't mean like your messages like you're pontificating out there, but I think you're offering a framework to really encourage people to not just behave a certain way or act a certain way, but also to really take ownership and take responsibility for the choices that they're making. And you're taking this into a whole wide variety of organizations, associations, and different groups. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing today and how you've taken your model and really put it to work out there in the real world.
Well, it's been a long process. Whenever I first started doing this, there was about 3 or 4 of us that were doing similar work. And we actually were joking that, you kind of felt like you were this voice in the wilderness. And then slowly what we've seen, though, over the past 20 years is that it's becoming more prevalent and people are starting to become aware of it. And especially with the pandemic going on, this is a big thing. And I don't want anybody to think that, I think that this is going to fix everything or that I'm, this is the way to go. But it's really, for me, it's something that's good for people to know is out there if they want to learn it, because like they say, if people have said, why is it that there's nobody ever teaches this? Well, this gives them an opportunity if they want to learn it to find a way to feel more peaceful, because when you're doing this model, you don't get angry as often. That doesn't mean you don't get angry. It just means that you know how to manage your anger better.
Right.
And it's not counseling, because counselors work on stuff that I'll actually send some of my clients to counselors if they've got deep-seated issues where they work through stuff. But it's kind of that mind, body, spirit thing, and so now I do a lot of writing. I write for an organization called MPUG, which is a project management organization that's affiliated with Microsoft. And I write articles for them. Sometimes I'll do a webinar for them. I have some clients that I see, just kind of on a regular basis on a retainer. And then I try to do a lot of podcasts, just because to me, when I do this, it's almost like teaching a class. I'm saying, okay, here's the model, and, try to work on it. And then if you have trouble with it, contact me and I'll help you work through it.
Yeah.
And because, sometimes it can take upwards of a year to learn the model, because, if you're into mindfulness, and, you talk about having a practice. Well, that's really what this is it's a practice.
Absolutely. I get that.
So if you're wanting to find a practice that's more action-based than sitting, quietly, which that's also good too. But if you're wanting something that's going to help you be mindful throughout your day, then, you could use the vocabulary of mindfulness.
Yeah.
And so, so I try to teach it in that manner. And then also critical thinking skills.
Right.
Binary thinking is black and white.
Right.
Well, this teaches critical thinking skills. So sometimes I'll work with it for that. And then I also sometimes will do facilitation. So if you have a bunch of people who have very strong opinions about whether something's wrong or right or good or bad, I help them facilitate through it to say, okay, this isn't good or bad or wrong or right. Everybody's got a different decision. Let's make choices now through this process. So
how would people find you or find out more about your work?
The best place is website, which is expectations2reality.com. See, now everybody knows what that means when they see it, which most people don't.
And it's expectations, the number 2.
Yes. Yeah. Expectations with an S, 2reality.com. And there's actually a resource center you can sign up for where it's got handouts in it where you can get started on the process. Yeah, it's free stuff that you do. And I wrote a book back whenever I did my dissertation.
Yes.
It's called Fixing the Problem. Making changes in how you deal with challenges. And if you go to that resource center, you can actually click on the button, and it's only 99 cents on Kindle. So it's really, it's not a money-making thing for me, but it does have the model in it, and it has like every chapter is like a little book that you can do.
Oh, wonderful.
And so it's a very inexpensive, if you've got a Kindle. I think the book's only like $5 or $6, maybe $9, I'm not sure, but less than $10. And so if you want an actual physical one, you can order it on Amazon.
Oh, you can order it on Amazon.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well,
In
we'll
fact, I haven't done much with the book in a long time, but actually MPUG just asked me to do a webinar on it. So next week, I think it's on Wednesday, I'm doing a webinar for them on the book. So
okay.
talk about the book. So
well, I'm guessing there may even be more to come, because by the time this airs, we will be beyond that webinar. But
yeah.
but we will have links to your website and to everything, to your book, and to all the resources you've mentioned. You've also mentioned some of the other people who've really been influential in your life and in your work. We'll have all those resources in the show notes so that people can access those.
Oh, great. Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for being here today.
This was great.
I love your model. I love the way you framed it and shared it with us. And I know that there's so much more to come in terms of the value you're bringing out there to people. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's great. And so many more people are doing it now, really thinking about it and making it a part of their life. So that's exciting for me to see.
Yeah.
Already changing. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Lynette Reed. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her personal and professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at www.tammygoulerloeb.com. Just look for episode 115. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Do you feel a little stuck? Get specialized group and individualized support, insights, and accountability from a brilliant mix of professional women in a safe, non-judgmental creative space. Join one of my small hybrid mastermind coaching groups, starting on a rolling basis. You can learn more at https://bit.ly/navigating career change. If you were inspired by this episode with Lynette, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at www.tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcasts button and follow the instructions provided there. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.